right, how is everybody doing? My name is Rex. Welcome to my show. Welcome to my latest Paleo Talk segment. I am here joined by Josh, I will say. Josh, how you doing?
How's it going, guys? Long time no see.
Long time indeed. Good to have you here. And now, Jeffrey, how you doing?
I'm hanging in there.
Good to know. All right. So, Jason, welcome again. And how you doing?
Doing well. This should be fun.
All right, so let's get into this right away. And this time we're going to be addressing this latest Dilophosaurus paper that has been out and about. And we're going to give you our 2 cents about certain points of it and what we think. And we're going to try to give you a context as well so you understand from where we are coming from. And once we are done, we're going to wrap it all up with a nice bow on top. And then you let us know what do you think in the comment section below. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you support it by subscribing and hitting the like melee button. Let's get into this. So Jason, I think maybe it's a good idea for you to start off and unpack a little bit and give us full context of what this paper brings to the table, and just tell us what are we supposed to learn from it in terms of the material, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. So this is basically a big monograph on redescribing Dilophosaurus, written by Adam Marsh and Tim Rowe from the University of Texas. And it's kind of you can look at it like a big reference piece, right? So they've gone through and they've looked at all the specimens that have been associated with Dilophosaurus, and they have redescribed them all and provided a ton of images to go with it. And then they also ran some phylogenetic analyses on it using these new data to see where Dilophosaurus falls among theropods. So they went through and one of the things they did was they really looked at the validity of Dilophosauridae, how many species are actually in the genus Dilophosaurus, and whether or not there are any diagnostic features of those species to warrant it. And in the end, the spoiler alert, I guess you could say, is they found that there's only one species right now, Dilophosaurus wethrillii, and that is just the one from all the different specimens that they found from the Kayenta Formation, from all that area that we've found Dilophosaurus. So it's pretty fairly long-lived species by the looks of it, or at least a long-lived genus.
We're looking at like 10 million years from the earliest to the latest.
Yeah, so it's got a good run in it. A good run for it. So whether or not that'll stay permanently as that, we'll see. They did mention that there's a few specimens. I think it's from the the museum in northern Arizona has a couple of specimens. Well, it has a lot of specimens, but at least a few of those are specimens that don't fit. They're just like, they can be compared to Dilophosaurus, but they can't say for certain whether or not they'd actually be Dilophosaurus. So there might be other critters out there that are in that group, but at the moment, from all the available data, it looks like Dilophosaurus is currently a monospecific genus. That is the kind of big take home on that. The other big one they did was with their phylogenetic analysis, they kind of were able to figure out, based on their data, that Dilophosaurus is actually what they call a stem avarostran. So before it was considered, before it hopped around a lot. So at one point it was a coelophysoid, at another point I think it was considered like a basal ceratosaur. Now it looks like it's kind of none of the above and just its own offshoot that comes a little further down a little further towards the crown, less basal. And then of course the importance of Dilophosaurus being that it's like the first large theropod post-Triassic extinction. So it's really given us an idea of how dinosaurs were adapting after that big major extinction event and how they started branching out from there. In terms of a summary of roughly what's going on, I'd say that about covers it. If anyone else wants to jump in with stuff, feel free. as I look through things and make sure I didn't miss any specific parts.
Yeah, no worries. We can pick up on it later on anyway. So,
Well,
It is a
I
very
think-
large paper.
yeah, I think it's interesting that, in that summary, there's not a whole lot of the sensationalism that you're seeing in the secondary sources, the mainstream media or people sharing this stuff on Facebook.
Can I quickly interject? Sorry.
Yeah.
They're not mainstream. They're lame-stream media. That's what they are. That's the real name. Sorry, continue. Didn't mean to interrupt there.
Rim shots, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I haven't read the National Geographic article, but it seems like the points of those articles are, here's what Dilophosaurus looks like, and it's nothing like the Dilophosaurus of Jurassic Park, which is like, you kind of want to sit back and say, no, duh. Not a soul since 1993 has thought that the Dilophosaurus in Jurassic Park was accurate if they've read anything beyond watching the movie. So, like, there's no news there. But, yeah, there's not a whole lot here that is a bombshell saying, holy cow, this dinosaur is so much different than what we thought before. And it seems like that's kind of the impression that you get if you're reading not the study itself, but you're reading people reporting on the study. So, yeah, there could be quite a bit of spin going on there.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me ask a question real fast for both of you guys, because you touched up on the phylogeny. So right now it's what we call a neotheropod, so it's a stem theropod, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so from a phylogenetic standpoint, as a stem theropod, because I'm sure you guys know where this is going. Everybody's kind of misusing the phylogeny to throw a certain attribute
Feathers.
on anything dinosaur ever to exist ever. So within relation to that argument, what does this new bracketing do for that loophole everybody keeps trying to get around?
Not a darn thing.
Not really anything at all. It moves what they say. It moves Dilophosaurus more towards the crown. It's always a fun word to use. Sort of away from more of the basal branches of theropoda, but it moves it around a little bit, but it's still roughly within the same area it was in before. It's just not specifically a coelophysoid or like a ceratosaur. It's just a Dilophosaurus.
Very cool. Okay, so would you guys say that this makes an argument, a better argument, where it sits as a floater, for or against? Like, is it any more scaly than Ceratosaurus versus any more feathered like Microraptor or anything like that?
It still falls pretty far down the tree, pretty far away from Maniraptors, from the ones that we hear all the time, Coelurosaurus. So that's really the area where you start to get any of that fuzz popping up. So yeah, it's still pretty much on the most likely scales area.
Gotcha. All right, that's all I wanted to hear.
The bracket.
That's a good talk, everyone. Good talk.
Yeah. The bracket hasn't changed at all. The earliest thing for which we have, at least that I'm aware of, that has integument data would be Ceratosaurus. So this is still earlier than Ceratosaurus. That hasn't changed. And then on the other side of the bracket, you've got crocodilians. And, last I checked, we hadn't found any feathers on crocodilians. So, yeah, if you're going by phylogenetic bracketing, there's no change. It's still more likely scaly than anything else, even if it sits in the weeds.
But Jeffrey, didn't you know that it has genetic material, therefore it must have been able to produce feathers at one point at life, no?
Yeah, well, so do crocodiles. We'll not go down that rabbit hole, but suffice it to say, genetic. Well, okay. Just go back to junior high. Genotype is not the same thing as phenotype. That's all there is to say to that.
Yep. Well, you knew there was a reason why I brought this up. You knew where it was going. Yep. So let's get into the next point, since we established what the context is. Basically, in the paper, are there any red flags or points of criticism that any of you would like to raise, and who, if so, who wants to go first?
Okay, well, let's all just jump in at once there. Okay. There's some interesting things. Jump. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a 100-page paper, and I gotta admit, I have not read through all of it. But I've got a little bit of background, not like insider information or anything like that. But if memory serves, Tim Rowe presented on this paper to the Utah Friends of Paleontology annual meeting a few years ago. And so we got a little bit of a glimpse of what was in the works on that. And it was really interesting to hear about that. And I was pretty favorably impressed. So I was coming into this with a bit of a favorable bias, but looking over the paper, about the only quibble that I can really come up with it is that occasionally when, and this is me being an English geek, occasionally they'll have sentences which will list information in a way that's a little bit confusing how they're related. Let me see if I can find the example. And I'm wondering if this didn't cause a little bit of confusion in some of these articles that are reporting on it. And maybe I'll get to the pre-maxillary one first.
Yes, that is an interesting one and worth bringing up.
Yeah. So one of the sentences that kind of threw me is the first sentence when they're talking about the pre-maxilla. I'll just read it. The pre-maxilla comprises a bulbous anterior body, long nasal process, and short maxillary process that forms most of the anterior and dorsal margin of the external nares, which circumscribes a subhorizontal ellipse. Now, I know this is science speak, so it's going to come across as gibberish to most of us anyway. But if you read that, you get a description of the shape of the bone, but then after the comma, like it almost sounds like it's implying that the maxillary process forms most of the front and the top of the bony nostril, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but I thought the nasal process formed the dorsal margin of the external nares. So
for Dilophosaurus, wait a minute. We had where's our cheat sheet images go? Yeah, the external nares usually gets formed by, or the bony nostril, which is a better term for it anyway, is usually formed by the premax, maxilla, and then the nasals. And then they kind of all, to varying degrees, form part of the margin to that. Sometimes, depending on your specimen or species, one bone can take over more of that job. And for that, I really need to take a look at what our skull looks like for Dilophosaurus again.
Yeah, so like just looking at that, looking at the picture and kind of following the words as if it were a map, I came across with the, if I were to go by the words, it seems like the maxillary process, that's what's going to be attaching into the maxilla, but that's the bottom of the nostril, not the dorsal. That's the ventral part of the nostril, not the dorsal. So, that was one that kind of threw me. Another one was where they were talking about the crests, and in this they're talking about Monolophosaurus. It says the crest of Monolophosaurus jiangyi also includes the Pre-Maxilla, is highly pneumatic, and is anteroposteriorly expanded. Now, one of the things that I've been hearing in the interwebs and from a lot of secondary sources has been talking about the crest of Dilophosaurus being pneumatic, so basically spongy. And I couldn't find that anywhere in this paper, certainly not in the description. Maybe I'm missing it. But it says here that Monolophosaurus's crest is highly pneumatic. The way this sentence is written, I can't tell whether also refers to just including the Pre-Maxilla or if it includes everything that comes later. So there are some things that I read and said, like, what? But
there's some run-on sentence stuff that's happening here. Yeah. I was looking back to that Pre-Maxilla bit, and yeah, I see what you're saying. Because, yeah, they're talking about its long nasal process, which would form that dorsal margin. And then there's a short maxillary process that's going to form that ventral margin. And then it all just kind of blobs together into the sentence. So it can get a little confusing to figure out which is supposed to form which part here and there. So, yeah, so it would be, in this case, their nasal process of it should be forming that dorsal margin.
Yeah. Okay.
So would you guys say that the paper suffers from just to put it in very layman's terms, like a lack of commitment? Like,
I think it's a problem
out there.
I think it's just a problem that you run into with these descriptive papers, because having done descriptions of anatomy before, it can get very wordy very fast. Oh, yeah. You're trying to describe something that you can just show in a picture, but you got to find a way to word it so you can sort of make that mental image, that word picture in your head.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say it's a lack of commitment by any means, because looking at the methodology of the paper, it seems pretty darn sound. I like a lot of the things that they're doing, and they've gone into quite a bit of detail. There are little bits here and there that kind of throw me, but this is me being former writing lab guy saying, now I got into this paragraph and I didn't quite understand what you were saying here, and getting into the nitty gritty of how the words are put together in order to reflect what's going on. The fact that I could look at the pictures that they provided and compare that with the text and still get a sense of what's going on just says, these guys could maybe, spend a little bit of more time in the writing lab, but welcome to science, right? Most scientists are kind of in that same kind of boat. And like Jason said, this is an incredibly complex form of writing. So I'm not throwing the book out, and I'm just saying, the result kind of threw me a couple of times, because I would be getting a little bit lost for a bit, had to come out of the writing, look at the picture, and say, oh, that's what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And thankfully for a lot of the really just like convoluted bits, there's usually a figure call that you can click on that'll take you to what they're trying to explain in words. So that comes in really handy. If we're going with red flags, I guess there was one area that I remember I thought was interesting. On page 6, on the second paragraph, first full paragraph, they talk about Megapnosaurus Kayenticae. It's a little one.
Kayenticae.
But they specifically say that they are not going to use the genus name Megapnosaurus. They retain the generic name Syntarsus, which is interesting because, and maybe something has occurred in the past, 20 years that I missed, but Syntarsus got sunk initially because Syntarsus was the genus name for a beetle. which is not the first time that a dinosaur name has gotten sunk because a beetle took it. So they went with Megapnosaurus, and everyone was like, well, that's a terrible name, and that's really disappointing. But it's interesting that for this paper, they basically said, yeah, but no, we're just going to keep calling it Syntarsus. Since it's not a Syntarsus paper, I guess it doesn't really matter, but it was interesting that they just flat out said that, yeah, we're just not going to use that word. Or we're just not going to use a Megapnosaurus.
Yeah, not only that, but I see that there's two Syntarsus that are mentioned. So there's Rodensiensis, and then there's the one you listed. Yeah, which is sadly split between the paragraph and the next sentence. I'm actually trying to piece it together with my eyes. So to be fair, both of those technically have been sunk.
They're,
it looks like. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Oh yeah, that for some reason the phylogeny of Coelophysis is formed a lot by some very finicky opinions, and I'm not in saying that I'm not trying to discount some of the facts that those opinions are based on, like looking at the arguments. Megapnosaurus, it seems to me like there's some good reason to say that that's not Coelophysis. When it comes to sinking Podokesaurus into Coelophysis, it's hard to say when the holotype got fried in a fire. But what I'm referring to is just there seems to be an odd tendency for Coelophysis workers to want to rename things. So like the whole Rheoerebasaurus aspect of that, or like Megapnosaurus, Syntarsus, the names keep getting kind of thrown around, and you've got some very strong opinions on how to do that doesn't really affect how you look at the facts. Or it can if you let it, but it's I don't know. Sometimes I come out of it thinking I understand why we can't call it Syntarsus anymore. I understand why people might not like Megapnosaurus. I can see why some people might try to say, well, it's all Coelophysis, but yeah, Syntarsus, Megapnosaurus, Coelophysis, it gets weird there, and it's not quite fitting the facts in the same way that other arguments might.
Yeah, because I'm reading the sentence. I'm reading the entire second paragraph of page 6. And it even says that it's a personal preference for the author. So to quote it, it says, we prefer to retain the generic name Syntarsus, or the South African Syntarsus rhodesiensis, Rath 1969, and North American Syntarsus Kaya, whatever the hell.
If you imagine it very Italian, and you just sort of follow it like it's a musical note, then it seems to work. Yeah.
It reminds me of that song, what was it, Malakaliki Makai?
Yes. Perfect.
Instead of it's too early for me. Or Coelophysis, because of the systematic relationship of these animals within Coelophysidae is in flux. So it does explain that in the very first, very long sentence within the paragraph why they're preferring Syntarsus. So I guess the question is is it a sense of personal preference versus what should be done technically when you're dealing with a very technically heavy paper?
Yeah, and it mostly just comes off as it was an interesting choice, and it's just funny that the response is look, this is a thing. We know that this is a weird area, and no one's really happy with it, so this is just what we're going to call it. And since it's not specifically about Syntarsus, it doesn't really matter. Yeah,
and it's just kind of their opinion, their preference to call it Syntarsus, and as long as that remains clear. I mean, because it is a fact, there's a whole lot of argument over just exactly what taxon belongs with what in this, and so it is kind of the scientific equivalent of saying we're calling it Syntarsus because no one can agree, and we like the name Syntarsus.
Yeah, pretty much. So
Yeah,
no harm,
so-
no foul there. Just a fun
No harm, no foul.
little quirk.
Yeah, I was about to say, because, I mean, we all have names that we prefer, right? Like, I mean, not prefer, but are so ingrained in our minds. The best one being Basilosaurus. Obviously, it's not a lizard, it's a whale, but we still, for the majority, use Basilosaurus versus Zigalodon. And then the same thing with Troodon, which was just recently discredited, right? Like, Troodon's now on the cutting table, like it's been destroyed.
It only refers to the holotype tooth now, and that holotype tooth is dubious, so Troodon's dubious. That doesn't mean that it's invalid. It's just there's not much that we can say about it, and it's problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, yeah, no, I disagree. Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's it's known from as was it from Paul Willis in Australian paleontologists used to call it because he had to deal with that a lot with Australian fossils. But it's known from what they like to call as shitty little pieces. So really hard to make it diagnostic beyond that.
So, all righty, cool. Yeah, no, I mean, I'd say for the most part, like the technical information, at least from a paleo artist standpoint, this is probably for me the most concise paper I've seen of, like, I guess all assigned Dilophosaurid material. Again, my only red flag really is just the reconstruction bit at the end. I mean, just to jump ahead.
Do you wanna get into your monograph then?
Well, before we do, just so we can get, so we did give one red flag, or a couple red flags for it, and in general we've been pretty like in general we're comfortable, like it's a good paper, it's going to be very useful in the long run. I did want to give it props for one bit on page 25, and then they cover it again in their discussion. It's the last paragraph on that, the last half. It's like just the last chunk of that page. But they talk about the submarial gap in Dilophosaurus, which is all very distinct. It gives it that sort of snaggletooth look that we're all familiar with. And what they looked at was that they looked at the connection between the Pre-Maxilla and the maxilla through that submarial gap. And as they mentioned in the paper, they mentioned how it was originally conceptualized to be this ligamentous articulation, and this actually had a lot of it had long-term consequences to this. So, growing up reading about Dilophosaurus, oftentimes you'd read about how it had a very weak bite, and it couldn't really tackle large prey because its jaws were weak, and so it was probably a scavenger. Or then it was probably a scavenger it was largely a scavenger that maybe used its arms to capture prey and then just use its jaws afterward. And then that also became one of the main drivers behind why Michael Crichton gave Dilophosaurus venom, because as he mentions in the book, it was originally thought these were scavengers because of their weak bite, but then it turned out that they had venom, so they didn't have to bite so hard. This new description makes it clear that submarial gap that was thought to be a really weak point, it was actually a lot stronger than we previously thought, and so would not have really limited this large predator from being a large predator, which honestly should not be that surprising. But it's good to have more information out there to kind of just bust that myth and just kind of take care of that once and for all.
Yeah, I'd actually, since you're bringing up the infamous movie, I actually wanted to ask you if there was any, because I read as much as I could of this in between work and just trying to juggle everything. And it is a very meaty paper. Is there any info deferring to why? Because from what I'm trying to understand, mind you, this is from like pulp culture telephone games from when I was young. We kept hearing the telephone game that a lot of other reasons why people thought Dilophosaurus was venomous was also because of certain pathologies within the teeth, or what tooth material was available at the time. So we kept hearing about these like phantom grooves in the teeth that led to this popularization that was also like part of the reason why it was venomous. So is there anything out there that even remotely comes near that, like in this monograph or even in past publicated papers?
In this paper, I didn't come across anything about venom, or not surprise venom, but anything about grooves in the teeth. Though, like you said, it's a lot to take in, and so it's possible that maybe I missed a bit. The only thing I can think of that came up in the that comes up in the literature for venom in a theropod was for a Sinornithosaurus specimen that had grooves along its teeth that I think have since been interpreted as just like some weird side effect of the tooth slippage, and so the grooves were maybe not as legitimate as they thought. But gotcha. I don't know of an instance where Dilophosaurus was ever thought to be venomous aside from Michael Crichton's book. But, I definitely not read everything out there. So it's possible that I was getting it from somewhere else. Maybe Greg Paul mentioned it at some point. I don't know.
No, that's cool. Yeah, no, because that's a legitimate question. Because, the main thing also that we want to do with this video is also debunk and also shed light into why certain concepts came into light in the first place. So for the instance of Dilophosaurus, because it's the most JP inclusive dinosaur, and it's also the most infamous of the dinosaur reconstructions out there. So it's like for me, this
child for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. So for me, this gives me a good reason to just kind of like lay all the chips out. Like, okay, where did these ideals originate from, and why were they included, and why did we get the frilled lizard version of Dilophosaurus? So Jeffrey, what about you? Have you heard? Do you know of any instances where it's like tooth grooves and all this jazz?
The only dinosaur that I've ever heard with tooth grooves being used as evidence for some level of venom would be Sinornithosaurus. I've not heard that in association with Dilophosaurus at all.
And I would not be surprised if I would not be surprised if over time those two got conflated together with the Jurassic Park interpretation and then the Sinornithosaurus stuff, which came out later, just kind of because of the internet telephone game, just combined with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so because, as the case for me, because I'm here clearly the example of a victim of the Paleo telephone game. For me, this is what the reasoning was for the longest time. So that there was never evidence for like these very elaborate soft tissue displays per se that we see in the film as far as the frill.
That was definitely all artistic license.
Yeah. But
that's all well documented.
Yeah, but as far as the venom bit, like we were hearing in the early '90s, rumors that we did have venomous dinosaurs out there. So now it was just an issue of like, okay, well, what's justifying the venom in the dinosaurs? And that was the telephone game, was like, oh, tooth grooves. Oh, okay, cool. So because these tooth grooves are so distinctive compared with all these other theropods, the logical conclusion to a lot of those pathologies was like, well, maybe they just had venom in them. Like the most specific, I guess, lizard with that kind of pathology is like I believe the Gila monster. Mm-hmm. And the Gila monster is a venomous lizard. I think it's one of the only venomous lizards as far as traditional venom. Compared to varanids, which have a kind of gray area with their venom classification.
What about
that's a controversial subject for another time.
Yeah, there was another one. There was a beaded lizard as well, I think, or something like that. That's a venomous one too.
Beaded lizards and Gila monsters are both under Heladromatidae, so they're both each other's closest relative. So it makes sense that they both have the same venom.
Yeah, for people who haven't seen, because I've seen both of them and they're pretty gnarly. But the beaded lizard is a Mexican cousin of the Gila monster, and it's also bigger than the Gila monster. It basically looks like a bigger, more brown version of the Gila monster. But yeah, no, I mean, you take a look at the pathologies in those jaws and the teeth, and you can see like where the venom sac is inside of the jaw, where those envenomation areas move up into these grooves into the teeth. So that's what we were being told for the longest time. And it was probably in correlation with the species Jeffrey brought up, which was, what was it again, Jeffrey?
Gosh, now I can't think.
Sinornithosaurus.
Sinornithosaurus. There we go. Yes.
Yeah, so in association with Sinornithosaurus, I mean, that's what we were being told was being found with what was the material for Dilophosaurus. So it's good to have this as an opportunity to clear up the air as far as I'm hearing, there were no instances ever of any groove pathologies with Dilophosaurus teeth, right?
Right. As far as we know, right. And let's see. That's interesting. Sorry, I was looking stuff up based on the original.
Like, there's some interesting stuff going on with Dilophosaurus's serrations, but I don't recall seeing any grooves going down them.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, because I want to. What this also showcases is like there's a rhyme and reason for why certain steps were taken as far as like the infamous movie. Because now that we do have the proper internet, a lot of the internet telephone game has been like, well, it was just willy-nilly and things were thrown in there, which there were. Don't get me wrong, I even read the book, and there was like monkey swinging dinosaurs at one point in the book. like they're literally swinging from trees like apes. I believe that's literally how they're described in the book. So there's definitely some things that were like, nah, man, don't do that. But as far as the venom myth for Dilophosaurus, I just wanted to showcase like there was a very distinct paleo telephone game that was based in very interesting findings at the time, versus it just being one of these like monkey swinging dinosaur marketing ploys. Because it was for the longest time. Everybody thought like they just pulled venom like literally out of nowhere and was like, this is a cool thing, let's throw it on this dinosaur. And then you have the fandom apologists that are like, well, the dino DNA and the frog DNA, and it's like, no, man, that's way more thought than you need to give that concept credit.
Right. That's fan rationalization amazes me at times.
Yeah, same here. I lost count, at the amount of times when I had to look at all of these crazy amounts of things that fans try to rationalize, and I'm just thinking, guys, just the movie doesn't really tell you that. You're just overthinking it. Take a chill pill and let's just move on, That's kind of how I've always been about it. And then, of course, I get like all the sorts of coprolids thrown my direction because I dared to say something that was not very popular, but hey, that's just what I do.
Going against the grain always
I'm
puts you at risk.
I'm going to quote Arnold Schwarzenegger here from the Kindergarten Cop. It's I am the party pooper. So
Nice.
Very nice.
And then just to bring it on home with the whole Dilophosaurus could actually fight. That's not right. Could actually hunt. On page 98 in their discussion, just above the conclusion, they state, and they talk about why Dilophosaurus could still hunt fish if you want, if that's one of the interpretations that Wells initially, the guy who originally found it, interpreted the animal as, but that pre-max articulation was strong enough that they could definitely have done some hunting of larger bodied animals. And they mentioned at the end that this capacity to hunt large animals is supported by the presence of partially articulated specimens of the early sauropodomorph Saherosaurus, here we go, Orofontinalis, containing large bite marks alongside shed teeth and a skeleton of Dilophosaurus within the same quarry. So, just to give Dilophosaurus some credit, it was doing some pretty active predator stuff around there too, or at least it looked like it had the capacity to be the active predator that back in the 80s and 90s it sounded like it wasn't.
So is it fair to conclude that Dilophosaurus for that time period and place was actually a bit of a generalist predator? Like it was a good all-rounder, and it didn't really, so to say, it wasn't really fussy about what it was going to take down. As long as it was on the menu, it was available, so it would go
Yeah, I mean,
it.
I don't think it was much of a specialist, and it probably would have fallen under an apex predator for the time. It was definitely the largest theropod around at the time.
Well,
Yeah,
that's something that I would kind of maybe argue a little bit in terms of like apex, but I don't have I haven't been able to look into what was going on in the formation a whole lot. This was something that was brought up in another presentation that was done to the Utah Friends of Paleontology, an earlier one actually, and it was Brian Eng talking about this particular paper and the illustrations he was doing in association with it. And he made that claim, and I overheard a very prominent paleontologist, I'm not going to name him, but talk to him afterward and get into a little bit of a friendly debate with him, saying that he had a lot of papers saying that there's a lot of great evidence supporting the fish-eating idea. Where I come into it, I think just looking at that skull, it is supportable to say that we're looking more generalist. If we want to say that it's an apex predator, what we'd have to do is say that nothing was habitually preying on Dilophosaurus. And given the amount of fossil evidence that we have for Dilophosaurus and how scanty it is, that's going to be a hard thing to say. It seems like there were other animals, non-dinosaurs, that might have been big enough to prey on Dilophosaurus. Does that mean they were preying on him? I don't know. There's just not a lot of evidence. But the fact that it does have kind of that kink at the front of the jaw does suggest that if it were a generalist, that it still had quite the preference for fish. But this paper does have a good circumstantial case to say Dilophosaurus was munching on Cerosaurus at least some of the time. So.
We do have at least one instance where it happened. Whether Cerosaurus was alive and killed by Dilophosaurus or found, that's the part that's harder to tell.
Yeah, but
go ahead, Jeffrey.
The evidence that we have, though, suggests that Dilophosaurus, or at least something like it, from all these Eubrontes footprints that we're getting in places like St. George and across the Kayenta Formation, do suggest that it liked to hang around rivers and lakes, and that kink is pronounced enough to suggest that it might not have been specialized like a Spinosaurus by any means. I mean, it's still got rather blade-like teeth and so on and so forth, but some of the features of the serrations there do suggest that fish played a larger role in its diet than maybe some of the other large-bodied theropods that we would be familiar with. Not a specialist by any means. I think calling it a generalist is fair, but it was a generalist with a taste for sushi.
So not far off from a crocodile.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, Eubrontes, for people who don't know, Jeffrey, that is a type of Dilophosaurid. Is that a trace fossil species?
That's a trace fossil species. And one thing that you got to know about trace fossils, like when we're talking about footprint species, it's not easy to connect the footprints to the body fossils. And so we kind of got to get in the habit of keeping them separate. A lot of the stuff that's found in the Kayenta Formation that is attributed to Eubrontes, which would not have been a real animal, that's the name of the footprint. But those Eubrontes footprints do fit with the rough size of Dilophosaurus. It fits with the joints of Dilophosaurus. We've got a sitting trace down in St. George that shows that the body of the animal making these footprints fits in pretty well with Dilophosaurus. So it's probably Dilophosaurus, but we're talking about footprints, so I got to call it Eubrontes.
That's the infamous body trace, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to put a feather.
Not the one that has the plants. That's not the one that.
That's the one I was thinking of.
I think that one came from Connecticut. It's been awfully hard to trace just exactly where that specimen is, where it came from. I don't think there's actually been a real study done on it. There have been a lot of claims and stuff put into museum publications, but researching that has just been like trying to pull teeth to get down to what the fossil actually says and to get beyond the opinions. The trace down in St. George actually does have a study done on it, and it does not preserve any trace of either integument or anything else. It's just, wrinkles, which is too bad because we do get integument traces on the bottom of some of those footprints in that area. So, dagnabbit, we could have put that to rest.
I want to put a bookmark on that real fast. I feel like we should go back to this once we get into the life reconstruction of Dilophosaurus. But to circle back to what Jason brought up, so I believe I found the paragraph. It says, while Dilophosaurus could pluck fish and small prey in the feval system depositing the Kayenta Formation, the pre-maxillo-maxillar articulation is much more robust than originally hypothesized. There is no doubt that the strong forelimbs are able to aid in the grasping and the manipulation of large prey during predation or scavenging. This capacity is supported by the presence of partially articulated specimens of the early sauropodomorph Saherosaurus containing large bite marks along shed teeth and a skeleton of Dilophosaurus within the same quarry, and this is cited as Rowe et al. 2011 and Marsh Rowe. I don't know why they cited their own paper within the paper, but there they are.
No, that's
the 2018 one.
2018, not Marsh and Rowe 2020.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, see, time is.
I know we've been in 2020 for like a decade now, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going back in time.
And by the way, it's Saherosaurus, not Saherosaurus.
Oh
yeah, I made that mistake too. I dropped an extra H in there.
It's so easy to read it as Saherosaurus, but yeah, there you go, Saherosaurus.
I had a question towards what Jeffrey said earlier on in terms of whether or not Dilophosaurus was an apex. Do we have any evidence of potentially large enough carnivores within the Kayenta Formation that could rival or exceed Dilophosaurus in stature and size to actually be viable rivals or even potentially predating on Dilophosaurus to contest the title? That's what I wanted to know. Does anybody know anything about that?
That was something that I was trying to look up, and it's hard to get sizes on a lot of the body material in the formations that include Dilophosaurus for whatever reason, and maybe it has something to do with it being aquatic. Kind of like you don't get a lot of good Spinosaurus material. Stuff in the chem tends to be all kind of chopped up and, how'd you put it, Jason? Shitty little pieces.
Shitty little pieces, SLPs.
Yeah. So that's a lot of what we get. Lately, we've been getting better stuff out of the Kayenta, and some of the finds have been pretty cool. But just kind of briefly going through that, I did find reference to crocodilian with a 15-inch skull. So that's, I don't know that that's necessarily big enough to take on a Dilophosaurus on its own, but it might be big enough to drag it under and start,
I mean, I guess the question becomes, what is our criteria for apex predator?
Yeah.
Because lions can still be taken down by crocodiles. Crocodiles can still be taken down by lions. Like, occasionally, the two big guys will go after each other. But, I mean, if we're just looking at who was the biggest theropod around during that small period of time, I think it's just Dilophosaurus. It's not like a weird situation like we see in was it in Hell Creek with it's not Hell Creek, the other one in Utah. Maybe it is Hell Creek. But where you have Allosaurus and you have Ceratosaurus.
Oh yeah, Morrison.
Morrison, thank you. There we go. Yeah, in the Morrison, where you have multiple tiers of predators living at the same time. Or even like the Carcharodontosaurus, Spinosaurus situation, where there's definitely two very large animals that could do damage to each other that are living at the same time. And so there has to be some kind of niche partitioning there. I don't think we have that data for Dilophosaurus, or at least not for the Kayenta. Like, I don't think there's another critter around there that's roughly on par with size with it. I mean, not that it really matters. I don't know how important apex really is as a thing. I'd say it was at least a large, probably tertiary predator, right? So the predators that could eat other predators.
Yeah, well, it's definitely bigger than whatever you want to call it, Kayenta. So like, yeah, it could still kills from that, and hey, maybe that's what happened with the Ceratosaurus. Maybe that was a stolen kill. That's kind of my point, though, is like the data are ambiguous enough that it's a little bit more of like a Jurassic Fight Club kind of an argument. It can be important to figure out what the apex predators are if you want to get the ecology, but Jason's point is absolutely right. What are your criteria for that? And then when you consider trying to do that with the fossils that we have available, and then you consider that the fossils that we have available for theropods at this time period are extremely sparse worldwide. How many of them do we know? Like 7 worldwide for the early Jurassic?
Oh yeah, it's pretty tiny. It's
9, something like that. So, we're dealing with a very clear case of a paucity of evidence, and it's hard to say anything for certain.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, it sounds like this is a very okay. We got something that Jason brought in
back when it was Dilophosaurus hunting Centarsus.
Right. Okay. Let me see if I can.
Yeah.
A very classic image. I remember. I can't tell you who drew it, but I definitely remember it being made.
Pauline. So I'm thinking it's somebody who's probably.
I'm gonna shoot
pulling off
shortly. Just want to see.
It's Steve Kirk. So I don't know who Steve Kirk is, but he's the one who wrote it up or drew it up.
I've got so many pictures here that we're scrolling through. Wait. Yeah, for some reason I cannot get it on the screen. I don't know why. Like, I saved it in that folder, I think. Let me try this again. I really want to bring it up on screen.
Sometimes you have to save it a second time just to figure out where the computer decided to save it.
Yeah, it saved it in the right place, it seems. I don't understand why it's not... it's a PNG file. Okay, I don't... Yeah, okay, let's save it again. Whatever, let's try it again.
Minor problems.
Right.
Slight technical difficulties, people.
Yeah,
this is how you know this is valid as a live stream per se, because like we have nothing's polished. It's all the nitty gritty of trying to piece together these elaborate talks that we have.
Let me see. Where is this in my notes? Paper sounds.
Okay, so really,
this wasn't in the rundown.
Let me drop another picture. Arson, do not feel obligated to throw this picture up. But another picture that I found was this skull. This was posted by Jim Kirkland on his social media feed. I'm going to drop it in the Skype right now. So is this the skull for Centarsosaurus, or what is now the defunct?
Centarsus?
Yeah.
Or Megapnosaurus, or I don't know. That's let's see. Looking at the scale there, it looks like it's in scale with it.
Yeah, this was from Jim Kirkland's, I believe. Again, the social media feed we all dread, which is Twitter.
A dumpster fire.
When I was researching Dilophosaurid skulls, so the whole of Dilophosauridae, this came up, I believe, on Jim's social media feed. So it's definitely a Dilophosaurid. I just don't know if it's Centarsus.
What was he calling it?
That's a great question. I do not have Twitter on my hand right now.
Yeah, I'm seeing if I can find it.
Looking at the features of the skull, it doesn't match Dilophosaurus. I mean, it looks like there's a little bit of a crest there, but certainly doesn't have that.
Yeah, it was his Megapnosaurus. So from November 6th of 2015, he posted it showing from the late Jurassic Kayente Formation, prepared by Scott Madsen. But yeah, cool. As he wrote it too, Megapnosaurus Kayente equals Centarsus.
Yeah.
No one likes the name.
No one likes the big dead lizard.
So
they're just mad because a beetle took it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is Centarsus that we're looking at here. Then that's the skull.
Substantially smaller critter. Yep.
Okay. Cool. All right. So, and then just to clarify, because that's the other thing I wanted to bring up while we prepare to dive into the skull reconstruction, is so within Dilophosaurus weatherelli, that's the only Dilophosaur within the genus. But what is still included within the larger Dilophosauridae?
Well, in page 98, so the same place where they talk about whether Dilophosaurus could hunt, at the top of the page, they talk about how none of their analyses found a Dilophosauridae. So they actually wind up just tanking that entire family.
Really?
Which is interesting. And they mentioned that there's basically no crested theropod clade, and that crests have evolved multiple times in theropods. They have the toolkit, and many times they seem to pull it out, which is interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you look at like some of those early tyrannosauroids, like Guanlong.
Which looks like it could be a Dilophosaur, like a late
Cretaceous one. I think in some early phylogenetic analyses, it was actually found as a Dilophosaur. I seem to remember reading an abstract from an early paper, or not a paper, an early presentation that Thomas Carr did. So hopefully I don't get this wrong, but that was noting some kind of crossover with the Chinese. I can't remember what they were calling it at the time, but something that has been kind of in Dilophosaurus before, and yet the more details, the more fossils we get, that kicked it completely to a much more derived clade. So,
just fascinating.
Yeah.
It is worth noting that the authors, when they did their phylogenetic analysis, they specifically made sure they did not use, well, not specifically, but they mentioned that the placement of Dilophosaurus in all of these specimens was not reliant on any of the nasal lacrimal crest characters. So that's another strong case for crests just evolving independently many different times.
I haven't, and I don't know if any of us have, read all the papers on all the additional species that were or are. I don't know. It gets more confusing as we dive deeper into it.
That sounds Yep.
Affiliated within Dilophosauridae, if it's now completely been destroyed. But was it primarily based on the nasal lacrimal crests? I imagine at the time when Dilophosaurus was found, it seemed like a very unique feature. And then as science has progressed and we found more crested theropods, I guess now it's become just kind of a, hey, this animal has lacrimal crests, sure, but so do all these other species.
It's a thing that can happen, and I think it happens early, or it happened prior to the changeover to quantitative paleontology, so like cladistic methods, because you could see, okay, well, this guy has this unique structure, and then this guy has a similar unique structure, so you would assume they would be sharing it from a common ancestor. And if you just use these unique structures, so these apomorphies, as your characters, when you put them into an analysis, you will come up with a phylogeny that's likely to group them all together just on accident. So it's important to have an analysis that takes a lot of random characters from ideally all over the body, and ideally stuff that is distinguishable but just kind of boring and not like super apomorphic. Yeah. So you call it was it phylogenetically informative traits, right? So an apomorphy is really cool because it's unique to yourself, but it also is terrible for a phylogeny because all it says is that you are you. So ideally you want to have stuff that's a synapomorphy or even plesiomorphies, so you can at least have an idea of the direction that things are heading.
Yeah.
And they pointed out in that paragraph too that actually Steve Brusati and company pointed it out in 2010 that the presence of a clade of crested early theropods is more than likely the outcome of character construction and coding. So it is basically an artifact of how they put together their phylogenetic analysis. So once you get rid of all of that, that's what winds up tanking the clade, Dilophosauridae, or even any kind of crested theropod clade, which is actually a good thing when they do that, because it shows you that if it's so contingent on the presence of crests, it's kind of like how Carnosauria used to be a clade. I mean, it's a clade again, but it used to be a group, but it was basically just the group of all the big theropods, and like all they had in common was that they were big. And as soon as you got rid of that as your character trait and started looking at the nitty gritty, things start splitting out a lot more, and you get a more nuanced and yes, more confusing view of the evolution of these animals.
Nice.
All right, so anybody else want to dive on any remaining things to bring up about the paper, or shall we move on to Josh's skull reconstruction, which I got right here?
I think we're good to move on.
All right.
Same.
Well, Josh, I wanted to say, first of all, very nicely done job. I'm really, really digging the approach, as usual. Very characteristic of you. It has your handwriting all over it. Even though I'm not looking at the signature, I'm looking at the presentation itself. So well done on that. And I wanted to ask you to elaborate. What did you do? How did you come to the conclusion? And how much, what were you basically trying to achieve and what it's meant to represent? Just take us through and unpack this piece of marvelous work.
So as a paleo artist, I'm going to do something that most paleo artists don't do and admit that I might actually be wrong in this instance. Just because of the last conversation we just had. So this I just sent it to you on the Facebook chat. So this is the larger skull monograph. So this was done presuming hold on, I'm juggling two computers right now, such is the joy of social media. So this was done with the presumption that Dilophosauridae was still around. So with the exception of Centarsis, which I did not include. All right, that should go through. Work, damn it. Technical difficulties.
Are you talking about the one that has a big skull on the right-hand side and smaller sized image of skulls and a yellow sort of tree in between them?
No, this one is
Different
this one is all the skulls that so you have stuff from Spinosaurus, and then you have all the additional material from Dilophosaurus weatherelli,
Okay.
or weatherelli.
Well, does it have like in the middle? Does it have like a place saying Dilophosaurus skull, and then it explains more in the writing? Basically, if I zoom in, it says Dilophosaurus with really
You have the different specimen numbers on
and
the
the
left.
specimen numbers on the left, yeah, stuff like that. Is that the one?
Uh,
It's basically like the skin chart.
yeah. I mean, everything's like the skin chart. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
nice.
I've got it right here. Yeah, don't worry about it. I've got it.
Yeah, I'm trying to send it to you on Face. I don't know why it's not. It's a JPEG, guys. Why don't you?
It's
why
in
aren't you
there
sending it?
already. I've got it up on my screen.
Yeah,
Yeah, can you
Yeah,
send
I
it in
think
the chat just so I know if it's the right thing?
Yeah, let's confirm the problem.
Can someone drop it? Because right now the main file is on my. I shouldn't say this, but the main file is on my work computer that I got here sitting on my desk thanks to the quarantine. But the main work computer is heavily moderated, so I don't have Skype downloaded on the main computer. So I have to computer jump to get files back and forth.
Look in the Skype group chat and see if that's the one. I've just sent something.
No, so that's the main reconstruction. So that's the large head. The one I'm talking about is the one with all the skulls, including
The
that.
outlines?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got that one. Let me pop it into the chat here.
No worries, we can verify once it's.
I swear I've sent this thing like 3 times on Facebook, and it does not want to send it for the life of it.
Yeah, that's Facebook seems to do that now and then. It just gives up on trying to send files.
Yeah, it just makes decisions of its own for some reason.
No, so that's Brian's work that he did when he did his initial reconstruction.
Oh, I see, up in the corner. Okay, yeah, geez.
Taking credit now? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, no, don't villainize me, man. I got enough of that going on. Let me see here. I'm gonna try the old-fashioned way of loading it, and then I'm just gonna give up. So let me see.
Yeah, try it in both Facebook and maybe the.
There we go. Okay, so it looks like it's working now on Facebook.
Right.
It's taking its sweet ass time.
Of course.
Spin the little wheel. There it is. Okay.
There we go.
All right, so that's what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, definitely did not have that before. Nice.
Okay,
I
so
need to find a way to save it now. So keep talking for now, and I'm just gonna save it and put it on screen.
You gotta
Monkey
keep the
wrenches.
no
I'm
dead
so
air.
sorry. So
Gotta keep talking.
Okay, so this is so that specific chart. So that was presuming all of Dilophosauridae was still intact. So that's why we have animals like a Spinosaurus, which at the time was considered a Dilophosaurid. I believe the sunk species is Dilophosaurus sinensis.
Yes.
So Dilophosaurus sinensis got sunk, and then was reallocated to Spinosaurus triassicus.
Correct.
But both of those were still considered valid within Dilophosaurids at the time of making this chart.
I believe that's right, yes. So they would have been just separate members of the group.
Yeah. So now that this chart came out and did its re-bracketing, we are now sitting on the very prominent notion that Dilophosauridae is gone, and now there is only Dilophosaurus weatherelli. So is that correct?
Yes, and in fact, the paper repeatedly says it's like the one and only species, like every single time, like an only species. There's never going to be
only
another.
one, damn it.
Oh yeah, there's the type and only species of Dilophosaurus. Sounds like they were really tired of having to explain why they're sinking everything.
So I mean, with that said, because I'm always, and again, we always have to put not that anybody follows it, but we always like to set an example that nobody follows. as far as how to correctly go about making things like charts and fossil reconstructions and things of that nature. So this current diagram, the burden is now back on me as a paleo artist trying to get information out there. That I now have to get the thankfully it's very tiny, but rest assured on the paper it's very large. The plaque that kind of gives my reasoning as far as why these skulls are included within the Dilophosaurid skull chart per se. So now I have to go back in there and explain Dilophosauridae is now sunk.
I've got
we tried.
I've managed to get the thing on the screen just so you know, and the plaque as well, so people can read it. If they can pause and read it. Just let everybody know.
Perfect. But just to go over this chart real fast. So all the fossils are to scale. And at the time and this is actually funny enough because KMV 8701, I swear that is the hardest skull to track down in all of history. That is the fossil skull that was formerly Dilophosaurus sinensis, and ironically, that's the skull that that was used to interpret the Dilophosaurus for Jurassic Park.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, so if you look at that skull, you can see why the proportions and the head shape of Jurassic Park's Dilophosaurus don't match up with the skull that we're seeing for Weatherilli. And as you can see, it's a much more basal theropod skull. It doesn't have that lacrimal notch that's right there between the maxillary and the premax. And it has a very rounded lacrimal crest. So that's, again, it goes back into the reasoning as far as like, why did Stan Winston create this creature this way? And we have to see like, this is why, because this is the information that they were being given to recreate this animal. That was the skull, because at the time that was the best preserved skull, and it was assigned to Dilophosaurus.
Very much like Brachiosaurus having Giraffatitan's head in the film.
Yeah, and I like to call it Brachiotitan because I feel like there's a missed opportunity there for a really great name.
Oh, just wait. It'll come.
Yeah, and no, but that's the other thing, too, because not so many people know that Giraffatitan is the old Brachiosaurus. But because we have a Brachiosaurus that exists, when you call something a completely different name with no association to the former, it gets lost in translation. So if I call it Brachiotitan, you know that, like, oh, that used to be Brachiosaurus. Versus Giraffatitan, it's like, yeah, this sounds like a giraffe mutant. like, I will say that all of this speaks to the weakest part of paleontology, which seems to be the name game.
Yeah, that some names are great and very, very poetic. Sometimes they just really don't work out. Triarchanuncus. Sorry, that's just, I mean, I think it's cool that there's a dinosaur named Captain Hook, but Greekifying it just doesn't come out.
My favorite of the...
Ugh.
If we're gonna do that, yeah, I think my favorite of the hated names, sorry to Doug Court and Laurie, but would have to be Thanos for the Ichthyosaur. And aside from the fact that you decided to name it after the Titan using an animal with like no arms, you base it on an atlas and axis, so two shitty little vertebrae pieces, and that's what you decided to name a species on.
I was absolutely just hitting my desk with my head, just banging it like really hard. Probably broke it. I mean the desk, because it's just really. I don't know what's the next one. Are they gonna name something Snow White next time, or what's the next one? Come on.
And we get it now and then. Like there's paleontology is full of nerds, and that's totally fine to have your fun with it. I mean we're still not as bad as the geneticists who gave us.
You know what else is interesting?
Sonic Hedgehog.
I don't.
And then it accidentally turned
Oh,
out to be
boy.
an incredibly
I don't
important
have a problem,
hox
for example,
gene.
when there's a nickname for Cangisaurus sinensis from China, and they call it Pinocchio Rex, for example. I don't have
Oh,
a
yeah,
problem with that because it's just like a common sort of name rather than a scientific name for the taxon and the species, whatever.
Yeah, that's just a nickname.
Yeah, exactly, and I don't have a problem with that. But when, if they actually called it a Pinocchio Rex as a taxon and species name, I would actually be thinking, guys, come on, just okay, just give me your crack, whatever. I'll just jump in on it.
So, but yeah, I mean, the name game is weak. But to circle back to the Dilophosaurus or the Dilophosaurid monograph, so this is officially, at least until a rebuttal to this paper is done or a reanalysis is done. So Dilophosaurids are no longer a thing, meaning that Spinosaurus triassicus, formerly Dilophosaurus sinensis, is a separate animal. Even though it looks like Dilophosaurus, it is not considered a Dilophosaurid any longer.
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, so you can see how that's a huge monkey wrench for this thing that I've spent all this time working on.
Yeah, well, that's the boat we're in. That's the boat
Yeah,
we're
no,
in.
and it is. And if anything, this is a good learning curve because this teaches paleo artists how to bow out gracefully versus, I mean, I can sit here and argue the invalidity of a paper that just came out, which honestly, I don't have anything against the paper. The only thing I have against the paper is the choice reconstruction that was done at the end. And even then, that not a lot was put into describing why choices were made with that reconstruction. But at the end of the day, it's like, no, this is a peer-reviewed paper. It stands with the data it has as far as the phylogeny, so I am in fault. And now the burden of proof is back onto me to course correct. Even though it's a very pretty graphic, it's now and it's my responsibility as a paleo artist to go in and say, okay, this is now
Josh,
now I have to.
I believe you
Go
have
ahead.
introduced something very interesting to the conversation, which we do not hear a lot of time from the other side of the argument, is the term responsibility, and I will add my own as well, accountability. And we do not seem to have that to be a common thing, and I believe, and I'm surprised that I have to say that, because I didn't think I'd have to, but I think that it might be a good idea for anybody to get a grasp of it, because I can assure you it's not as scary as it sounds, okay? So it's perfectly fine. Nobody has died from that yet, I can assure you of that. If somebody out there can prove me wrong, I will take responsibility, okay? There we are. So anyways, I wanted to ask you to chime in a little bit more, maybe on some other pieces that you have sent, because I believe you have prepared some really big, entrance, let's just say, on that part about the reconstruction, because I do think that there are some things worthy of noting, and I personally couldn't help but noticing that reconstruction they chose, it felt like it was just randomly tossed in there rather than actually explaining why they decided to pick it, why that out of everything else. It's not spoken maliciously here. It just brings up questions, and I'm surprised. Why is nobody asking these questions? So anyway, yeah. Okay.
No, and it's a very important, like, yeah, if anything, real fast. You did bring up a key thing, which is being willing to admit isn't as scary as it sounds.
Your microphone is breaking up a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yeah.
Me to say that I'm wrong repeatedly. But yeah, I mean, being willing to admit that you're wrong, even though you worked really hard in a very long graphic or reconstruction, it's not as scary as the internet wants to make it. Like, there's no shame in admitting, hey, I misevaluated something scientifically, and now I just have to go back in and fix it. it's a very easy thing to do. I don't know why there's so much stigma behind it in terms of like, hey man, I got it wrong. Now I got to go back and fix it. And it's a very simple thing. Yeah, I just want to admit that openly. And there's a good reason why I haven't released. And now I'm grateful that I didn't release that monograph yet publicly. And that's another thing. It goes into like, you know, the gift of patience. Being patient before you go ahead and release something out into the wild. So the reason I want to bring that up is because now that we established that, we can talk about this graphic, which is the larger head reconstruction that is up on Skype. So the reason why I brought that up is this reconstruction, which is the big head reconstruction on Skype, this is made up of all the known specimens of Weatherelli. So that's UCMP 70, UCMP 37303, and then UCMP 730. But I also did the addition of Spinosaurus, which is LMDL 10. So that's why I noticed. So that skull, technically, of Spinosaurus should not be a part of this reconstruction of the larger head. So that's what I wanted to point out really fast. So if you guys are following.
Yeah, I follow.
Yeah, I'm following so far as well. Seems to make sense. So basically, if we just cut the bottom skull out, that leaves just basically Dilophosaurus Weatherelli, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And I will say the only bits that are LDM L10 was to fit that gap between the mandible. So if you can see the jaw, there's a huge gap that's seen in UCMP 77270 and UCMP 37303. So those are the most complete jaws that I found within the monograph that's featured in the paper. There are some other jaw material, but as far as like puzzling together a skull, that was the best candidates for the jaw. So LDM Spinosaurus pretty much was used just to kind of fill that huge gap that you see with the skull. And then the rear of the cranial was used just to kind of fix up. As you can see, the best preserved cranial material as far as the there's a bunch of technical words that are coming up, guys, so hold on.
We're all right.
We're not afraid of technical words.
Yeah, right. So that was the best cranial material that I found.
Who is slamming the desk right now?
And I'm scrolling rampantly.
Oh, you're scrolling, right.
Yeah, I'm scrolling rampantly through this monograph so I can get all the correct terminology. Let me. So this is in regards to. Almost there. My God, there's a lot of bones. Paleontology.
It's okay when it comes time to reconstruct.
At
least you have a lot of great images to use.
Yeah. No. Okay. Here we go. So this is in regards to the the squamosal, the preorbital boss, the postorbital. So all those bones, pretty much, the best preserved we have of that specific specimen is UCMP 37302. But even then, those elements were crushed significantly. So a lot had to be deciphered as far as trying to reconstruct all of that rear cranial. So I deferred back to Spinosaurus because it had better cranial, and I just kind of used that as a template to kind of just realign a lot of those floating bits that were crushed. So as far as the influence Spinosaurus has on the skull reconstruction, it's pretty much limited to the rear of the skull and the gap that you get with the jaw. So that's the total influence of Spinosaurus on the skull reconstruction. Even then, I'll probably go back in and take away those skull bits just to reflect the correct phylogeny within the current paper.
So you're gonna basically keep all the Wetherilli specimens and slightly just redraw the diagram, but the general idea is gonna stay pretty much the same, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, all that technical talk just to say there's very little of the skull that's going to change. So,
Good.
because when you factor it in, very little of the overall, proportions in the skull, the crest reconstruction, because we also have a lot of the crests that I didn't think we had for Wetherilli. And it turns out the best preserved of the skulls actually preserves a good portion of the. Alluded in the monograph that there's no way of telling how far the crest, how large the crest grows. But again, that fact isn't really backed up by anything tangible. Like there's no real way. Well, the crest isn't going to go any further than what we see of the fossil, because UCMP, like 77270, that actually shows a lot of the crest. Like that's a good, like, I want to say 80% of the crest, and it is showing a very conformative shape that we did used to see within other Dilophosaurids, but now we're just seeing it in other crested dinosaurs, that they do tend to go for these rounded shapes overall, which I guess we can chalk up to just what's the terminology where the two things evolve with the same body plan for the same point?
Convergent.
Convergent, thank you. Yeah. Convergent Evo. So like roughly what we're seeing here is the skull reconstruction for the most part will be staying the same, but all I got to do is now go back in and take out the bits that are associated with Spinosaurus. But even taking out those bits of Spinosaurus, there was a picture that I featured, and this was utilizing Brian's work, because Brian actually was working on a very good Dilophosaurus skull reconstruction, and then it seems like it was abandoned halfway. And this is actually a picture that I'm dropping into Skype. So this shows both the skull reconstruction, and then it also shows the rough composite of all those isolated elements. And as you can see, that rough composite actually does mirror that image that Brian showed up on his Twitter when he was initially working on the skull reconstruction. So there you see all the UCMP material cobbled together as best as we can to align with the fossil bits and all the orbital, the preorbital, all the formina, and it's pretty close. Like we get a pretty close approximation of the overall look of the skull. And as you can see, all I did was I got that and I cleaned it up to kind of get our skull reconstruction. And the jaw is pretty straightforward, so not a lot was done as far as reconstructing the jaw, because the jaw material is very, very basal versus the complexities of the skull. So I didn't go into as heavy reanalysis on that. But the confusion comes, like, if you get either of these reconstructions, and even if you get Brian's reconstruction, and you cross-analyze that with the reconstruction that's featured in the paper, it feels like two very different skulls. And it even feels like two very different types of teeth are included with that skull reconstruction. Like, with Brian's skull reconstruction, we see very almost Spinosaurid-like teeth, which, again, with Convergent Evo, as Jeffrey noted, if this was a very Piscivorian-heavy animal, it would naturally be we would naturally see those teeth. We would see very Piscivore type teeth. But I will say that if you go to the former larger Dilophosaurid skull monograph, I actually do feature that one specific tooth that they highlighted. And that tooth is very different from what we see from Priscivores. As far as like the teeth that we're seeing featured in the reconstruction that's featured in the paper, which is strange because they actually go out of the way to describe that tooth and how the teeth are robust and how the teeth aren't like, these very delicate needle-like teeth. But then we get the skull reconstruction featured in the paper, and it seems like it almost backtracks on a lot of those points. So that's the final reconstruction right there. That's just showed up in the Skype chat. And you can see just from a tooth standpoint, like how those teeth look very different than the actual fossil teeth that we're seeing in the fossils themselves.
I see what you mean. They look a lot more spiky.
Yeah,
like straight up and down almost.
They look like Spinosaur teeth. Like they're very rounded, they're very conical, they're very long. And what we're seeing from the teeth from actually Dilophosaurus, like we're seeing very different teeth. So go ahead and give me your guys' feedback on everything I just dumped on you right now.
I just brought up the Brian's skull image that Jason sent over, and just so people can understand what's going on. So everything that was talked about, that's basically what it is. That's what they were referring to. Because obviously they bring it up for some reason when I save it, and I try to scroll through it, before. I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't want to show it up, so I just had to do another capture. But no matter technical nitty-gritty stuff. And Josh, I got a question for you. So
yes.
Do you want to maybe address that one? So how would you address on your basically skull reconstruction, right, where you have the original, you get these little bumps, that go towards the top of the snout, and they are obviously smooth when you do the full reconstruction, on your final version, but on the UCMP 77270, above the nostril, basically slightly to the front, you see some bumps there. And how would you basically address that, and what would you say that means in your opinion, and how did you go about tackling that particular bit, and did that affect your reconstruction choice?
So what we do is there's something that we do in reconstructions, and I say we as a larger group, not to say that this is exclusively what reconstructions do, but we have to compensate for something that's known as geological warping. And what that means is people have to understand when a skull is buried and being fossilized, it's a very organic structure. And that means that bones actually are very susceptible to warping, more so than people realize. And the best example of this is Sue. So Sue, if you look at her from the front, her skull just looks like it's been just plowed over. But ironically, all the skull bits still align. And what that means is that's a testament to something known as the geological pressure in the process, that it's a slow process over time. The bones are actually just as susceptible to being molded in a certain way, or susceptible to certain pathologies that we see that are strange, as any other organic substance. So the bumps that you're seeing, which is from 77270 from the UCMP collection, that might be an instance where it's very unique just to that fossilization process. Because if you also look at the next fossil, which is actually the better preserved of the nasal, which is UCMP 37303, you can see that that's a much better preserved snout, and it's a lot more rounded, it's a lot more smooth. So there's something to say that we also have to compare the fossils with each other to see which one of these fossils is the best preserved of the fossils, which one is showing us the true structures, and how is that factoring into the larger overall reconstruction. So when you see the raw composite, those bumps that you're seeing are actually bumps that are seen in that specific fossil. But that's not to say that those bumps, those very large prominent bumps, are actually very, or across the board, a feature of Dilophosaurus as a whole. That to say like there's certain structures that we have to compensate for just with the condition of the fossil, how it's preserved, how well it's preserved, how the skull's been exploded, how the skull's been compacted, how the bone material actually rubs up against other rocks when these formations start rubbing up against each other, and you get all kinds of weird stuff that starts happening to a skull. So that's why we do something like known as just comparative anatomy. Like we have to compare these animals with their larger cousins or distant cousins. The best example of this is sadly Spinosaurus. And as we've seen how left field Spinosaurus, like how such a large reconstruction loophole it went through, because it was being used as baryonyx and other animals were being used as comparisons of how to reconstruct the skull, and then also how to reconstruct the body. So that's roughly what I chalk up those weird pathologies to. Not to say that those aren't how the bones might have grown, or there are different unique pathologies going on, but I also say that, when we have such very clear comparative specimens that are associated with the same species, and we have an instance where one's just more in better condition, we have to kind of defer to those specimens as far as like, okay, I got to reconstruct the nose. Who has the better looking nose? You have the better looking nose. Okay, let's put your nose onto this very weird puzzle that we have going on.
So basically what it means is that having multiple specimens, well, as many as possible, helps a lot. So
and ideally multiple specimens of closely related critters.
So Jeffrey, Josh, thank you very much. I really appreciate you giving us explanation. As you can tell, I always try to ask questions to clarify and everything, because I know I'm not just gonna sit there and bow down saying, oh yeah, like totally cool. No, I mean, I can ask questions to everybody, you know what I mean? No exceptions, right? So
no one will be spared.
Exactly, no prisoners taken, nobody gets spared. So, and only the strongest survive, and my people over here fight 10 times as strong as all the regular ones out there. We're the strongest of the peasants. Right, so we're the champions of the plebs. So, Jeffrey, do you want to rant a little bit or just say anything, whatever, just before you have to go, because you said you gotta go soon?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess if it's final words time, then I'd say kind of the lesson to be taken from all of this. It's kind of what I ranted about earlier on in the discussion. Like, folk have just got to get information from the horse's mouth. I mean, looking at this paper and contrasting that with what we're seeing kind of thrown around and all the claimed reconstructions that we're seeing. Oh, yeah, I've got to do this new Dilophosaurus. There's nothing new about Dilophosaurus, except that it's not a Dilophosaurid. That's about all you can really say about this. Come on. I mean, it's great that we're getting, the description of this material. This is a great and an important piece. The funny thing about it is that it is very sort of rice cake. I mean, it's going to be nutritious for you, and I'm not saying it's boring because it's Dilophosaurus, and that's a bizarre theropod, but I mean, this is a meaty, important scientific paper, and people are kind of taking this and trying to spin a narrative off it that doesn't match with what the paper is saying. So I'm a little bit baffled. Why are we getting alternate looks at the crest? Why are we, putting feathers on this yet again? Why are we, playing around with soft tissue and saying that this is more scientifically accurate than anything that we had before, when, a lot of this stuff is just reflecting a different narrative than what was reflected in the very famous dinosaur movie. Is there a reason we're not saying Jurassic Park?
No, not really.
No.
Okay.
I don't
No.
think it's cursed like Macbeth, so we should be okay.
It was just a joke, really.
Joke, I guess. But
Yeah, it was just a joke.
The movie
Yeah.
that should not be named.
the movie that shall not be named. Yeah, I looking at the Brian Eng picture of this animal at the very end, that doesn't look any different to me in terms of principle than the poison-spitting Dilophosaurus. There's nothing more scientific about it. It's just another picture of a dinosaur, and it looks like it has several diseases in its throat.
Or maybe it's the testicles coming out of the neck trend.
Whatever you want to call it, but those crests.
Guys, sorry, just a second, quick
Yeah.
a second. Post your comments down below, all who are watching, and vote for the comment. Do you believe it's the neck testicles, or do you believe it's just a bunch of plague diseases or whatever? So let's find out what the people think. Sorry, Jeffrey, carry on.
Swollen tonsils. This poor thing's got tonsillitis. Sorry, but I mean, there's nothing more scientific about this. I'll even give the picture a pass here on the shape of the crests. I mean, we don't know that they were these curved half moons or anything like that. Josh brought up the plastic distortion that happens with bone, and so yeah, maybe the crest didn't V out at that 80-degree angle that's described in the paper, but at the same time, there's no real reason supporting the crests being this particular shape or being this close together, or so on and so on and so on and so on. So, I mean, calling it more scientific doesn't make any sense. It's I don't know, how would you turn that into kind of a double negative? It's not prohibited by science, I suppose, except for maybe the fuzz. But
Well,
there's nothing
let me break
better.
it down into a much more simpler question, Jeffrey. With the reconstruction, because here's the biggest thing I'm seeing. They're saying this reconstruction in a scientific paper, so therefore people are in one way correctly and another way incorrectly presuming that this reconstruction is being supported scientifically by everything featured in this paper. Now, the question I want to bring to you is, does the paper justify anything you see in this reconstruction?
No, that's a really good way to put it. The paper does not lead to this result. And if you want to test that, feel free to read all 100 pages of it for yourself. Don't take my word for that. The paper is all about lots and lots of bones. And it makes a few interesting statements that probably fed into this, but this isn't scientifically supported any more or less than the Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus. and that's what it comes down to. I wouldn't call this a reconstruction. A reconstruction means that you are taking something that was constructed and restoring it, right? This is just making stuff up and attaching it to the skeleton. So unless there is a tested rationale, a hypothesis that has experiments and fossil evidence behind it, I can't take this as any sort of an improvement in terms of scientific accuracy. It's not scientifically accurate. It's a picture. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so there's my rant.
Well, thank you. We were not disappointed, by the way, in case you haven't known. So,
I can rant on demand.
rant on demand. Precious. But yeah, I mean, Backstreet Boys song comes in here. Tell me why. Why did you
Tell
do
me
this?
why, yeah.
Tell me why.
How I feel every time I see one of these new papers these days.
I know. Talk about staying relevant to this day from the 90s, right?
They're interesting choices that get made there. I do think it's weird that you get like the National Geographic article talking about how everything from Dilophosaurus in Jurassic Park got wrong, and then they point to the reconstruction from Brian Eng of the life reconstruction that also takes a bunch of liberties on how the animal looks. It's like if you just stuck to just the bone skeleton stuff, it would have gone a lot. The news article would have been a lot less ironic, I guess, because all they're saying is like everything Jurassic Park did was wrong, and now we've added a bunch of other stuff that's probably wrong as a replacement.
Yeah, it just makes it look hypocritical, to be honest. And this is not a dig at Brian, because as far as I'm concerned, Brian can draw whatever he wants. Nobody's saying that Brian cannot draw dinosaurs with testicles. He can do that for as much as he likes. I have no problem with him doing that. And I have a problem when they say Jurassic Park got everything wrong, but they present something that is also not getting things right, and they're not.
It's at least equally speculative, yeah.
It's equally speculative. This makes it kind of disingenuous. It kind of drains it of credibility, and it also does not exactly explain how this one gets it right. Because if you're saying that this is wrong, you should be kind of at least trying to give us an alternative and better perspective of what exactly is right. Because this is kind of not really pinpointing the problem, because this is almost like a rhetorical trick that I'm seeing a lot on that side of the argument. When they do not pinpoint the problem, they don't make any specifics. They don't give you any specifics, what I mean to say, and therefore you cannot solve the problem. So they try to keep it as vague as possible, and then when you ask for context, you just get called an Easternophobe, and then you're like, yeah, how did we end up in this room now? So that's what I'm kind of have a biggest problem with, is that when you try to have the conversation, and a scientific conversation, for some reason this becomes an issue. But I thought we were kind of in this together to work things out. So I don't know, maybe there's something I missed along the lines. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, not only that, but I mean, as an artist, there's something to be said about instruction. It's like there's one thing to go to an artist and say, hey, reconstruct this animal, you have free reign, versus there's another thing to be an art director, or in this case an actual advisor to a paper, and get the art back and say, hey, we need to give you some clear instruction so it actually reflects the science. So it's not so much like you said, Arson, it's not so much it's Brian's art, nor is it Brian's art that's being included in the paper. It's the fact that nobody gave Brian any instruction as a paleo advisor. Nobody went to Brian and said, here are the rules for what we found in the fossil record. Use these rules because this is what equals a scientifically accurate dinosaur. The fact that nobody did that, and the fact that this is the same camp that said Dilophosaurus is the worst reconstruction in the history of dinosaurs ever, baffles me. I think that's why I'm so hung up on Dilophosaurus when all this came out. It's like this was the poster child for the most inaccurate reconstruction ever, and then they turned around and gave us the most inaccurate reconstruction ever.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know what was going on, behind the scenes. Like I said, I've seen presentations from both Brian Eng and, if memory serves, Timothy Rowe. I mean, it might have been Adam Marsh. I didn't get to meet them personally, but it's interesting to see that there's quite a bit of contrast between Brian's take on it and the author's take on it. And that makes me wonder, what the process is behind the art that's not being said, or what the different points of view were on that. I almost wonder, if this wasn't put into the paper in order to facilitate something else that made the study easier in some way, shape, or form. That's me totally speculating. I could be completely wrong, but when I look at everything that I know about what was going on with this paper, that's the questions at the back of my mind. Why on earth are these guys working with Brian Eng? They don't seem to really fit together. So,
yeah, I was gonna say that as well. That's very interesting. That they, where the true error really lies, because we are familiar enough with Brian's, approach to this. So he has his views, he has his opinions. And by the way, thanks very much, Jeffrey, for chiming in. We'll see you,
Jeffrey,
soon on the channel, as usual.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Sorry I gotta bail, but museum calls. So
yeah, understandable.
Yeah, no problem.
I missed you already.
Just point of technology. Since I kind of started the call, if I end the call, does that end everything?
That's a great question.
If you wanna, you know what? If you want, just mute your microphone and just leave it on for a bit, and because we're gonna be wrapping up soon anyway.
Okay.
And then when you come back, you will see
we won't run up your bill. We promise.
Yeah, because we are approaching 2 hours anyway, and that's gonna be a good time to sort of wrap it up once, with the last words and a little bow on top, as I like to say. And anyway, I wanted to say that I kind of a lot of times been called out on my channel that, oh yeah, you're shitting on Brian N's reconstructions. Yeah, sure, I take full ownership of that, and I have my reasons for why I shit on his reconstructions, but that is not the point here, and I want to make sure that everybody who watches is clear on that. That is not the point. The whole point is that where was the miscommunication, and why was the artist not instructed when doing the artwork and reconstruction, and when then you feature that artwork, that basically just makes you look like, well, stupid, basically, when you're saying that this is not accurate. And I put the meme up there as well, the one that I brought up earlier on, as that, yeah, you know what I mean, which one. It's kind of weird to me, but anyway, yeah, Jason, sorry, you wanted to say something.
So
go ahead.
Let's so we'll clarify. Typically, when you're doing a paper like this, you get the paper out, and then you contract with the artist, and you guys will discuss what to do. Brian has obviously seen the skull and taken lots of pictures of it here and there, and has probably visited the UCMP and done all his due diligence on that. I suspect what then usually happens with these things, or in my experience, what usually happens is you tell them what you want from it. In this case, you want them to reconstruct the skull. And then you may toss in an extra thing also, if you want to give us a life reconstruction, that would be great. For the life reconstruction bit, depending on how much you want to get involved, it could just be just give us your interpretation and we're happy with it. Or it could be, give us your interpretation, I like this, but can you change this and this? So I suspect that the image that we are seeing making the rounds is largely icing on the cake. It was one of those things. It was and Brian, if you want to do this, that would be cool, and we can show what it looks like, and then this is your interpretation of what you think it was when it was alive. And they didn't go beyond that, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I know other colleagues who worked with Brian in the past, and they're happy with his work, and they like it when he just throws out his interpretation. I mean, that's part of the reason why he gets hired. You hire the artist whose work you like. My only issue really comes down to places like Nat Geo, who decided to come up with weird phrases like everything you know about Dilophosaurus is wrong, and then toss in a very speculative reconstruction of a living Dilophosaurus without somehow recognizing the irony of what they're doing. And that is something that strictly falls on the journalism side of it. And I know they're partially doing it because that brings in the clicks. But it's just one of those things where
to be honest,
I could bring back another artist moment where it comes in. But yeah, I mean, in terms of how it works with the with paleontologists into paleo art. Usually that back and forth, that's the extent of it. And I suspect that with this kind of life reconstruction, it's more like, just give us your interpretation of what you think it was like as when it was alive. But if Brian Ing's interested in coming on and interviewing you with it, that would also be cool.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. The door's open, just ring the bell and we'll be here. And we can get everybody else back, the crew back together, and we can talk about it. And he can actually talk about having, what are just generally his opinion on how he does things. Because as much as I criticize the depictions, I criticize the final product. I'm not looking at what he does and how he does it, how he approaches it. I'm not interested, of course, in any other irrelevant issues that he engages in, if he does. I'm only interested in what he's thinking when he's doing these reconstructions, or I don't even know, just drawings, I guess, because I don't really consider them reconstructions. I suppose, just views and opinion pieces at best. But it's whatever. I mean, as I say, anybody, if they want to have a proper discussion about it and exchange opinions, they're welcome to come on. Just also be prepared that you're going to have some questions asked, and some of them might be difficult questions. So be prepared to answer them and admit that maybe you might not have all the answers, and that's okay. So that's just how we roll.
Difficult but cordial. No one's attacking anybody. It's just
exactly. Yeah, it's not like, let's just say nobody has died yet from being asked any difficult questions so far, to my understanding. So
there you go.
There's always, there's always that to keep in mind. And with that being said, I think as much as I have always expressed criticism towards Brian's choices, mind you, not Brian, towards Brian's choices of depictions of the animals, I'm not gonna throw this one on him. I'm gonna totally slam Nat Geo for choosing the clickbaity title, because they are acting as their usual selves, basically attention-seeking whores, pardon my language. That's what I am all about with here. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. Anybody else want to chime in with last words, and we're gonna start wrapping up?
Yeah, I'll say a few words real fast, because I would be interested in hearing Brian's take on the reconstruction, because I'm going to send you a picture right now in the chat. So that is Brian's process that he used. That's posted on his Twitter. I believe it's on his Patreon. And as you can see, this reconstruction actually follows very close to the reconstruction that I basically did use Brian's template to make the initial composite for the skull of Dilophosaurus, which is why we see the proportions that we see in my reconstruction. And as you can see, it's one of those cases where it's like Brian's work almost went against Brian's own work, because we have a very tangible, a very well thought out outlining of the skull elements, how they're isolated, how they're stacked together. And this seems to go very against what we ended up with the final illustration in the paper. So I am very curious about how he got from point A to point D so fast. And I mean, that's more or less like where I'm coming in, because we're seeing a lot of these reconstructions that are just mimicking the paleo art that's featured in the paper. And a lot of these kids are saying like, well, this is what the skull interprets. This is what the skull supports. And that's where a lot of the collateral damage control comes, because we got to come in and say, no, that this isn't what the skull supports. This is artistic license. But this is also a trickle down game where it's like, again, the whoever peer reviewed or authored or anything, whatever advisory was given in the paper, whatever power said this illustration was good to be featured with this paper, they do have to share an initial part of the blame, because Nat Geo is only reporting. They're just pretty much, I mean, at this point, just kind of a clickbait type of reporting entity, but at the same time, they are just a reporting entity. Nat Geo doesn't make up this news. Nat Geo only reports the news they're given. So there is a burden of responsibility that does fall onto the people that end up making these papers or decide this paper should be released publicly. because if this wasn't featured in the paper, honestly, Nat Geo wouldn't have anything to write. Like, this would not have emboldened National Geographic in any way to write this article. It would have been like, oh, what's Nat Geo writing about Dilophosaurus? Oh, they released a skeleton monograph. Cool. And then that just would have been it. But because everybody hangs on these instances of life reconstructions, that was the thing they narrowed in on. And sadly, that's the reconstruction the institution saw fit to include with the paper. So that's why we're dealing with all this. Like, there's a very clear path of responsibility that can be followed back. And so that's why I'm kind of curious as to why, like, you know, just as a paleo artist, it's also my responsibility to ask these questions of, like, why was this reconstruction chosen? Why were these directions not course corrected? What about this paper is reflecting these very broad stroke, these very broad stroke, like, you know, claims that you're making, like this thing had like gular throat pouches and like cassowary head bosses, and you know, it's like what about this very fractured skull material supports any of this? And those are the questions I'm more curious about, because from what I can read in the paper, as I asked Jeffrey, like, none of this is being supported in the paper. So now the question comes up as to why is this being touted with the paper as being scientific fact? You know, like, those are the main questions I really have. And these are the questions I don't see being answered for the most part, other than, you know, that clickbait factor, like the fact that they know if they put something very controversial and very anti-Jurassic Park in a scientific paper, that means that it's guaranteed a spotlight on National Geographic, which, yeah, I mean, Nat Geo being Nat Geo, it's pretty much just kind of it's kind of the Disneyland of science right now. Like, it's flashy and it's showy and it has a following, but the substance isn't really there. But that is a main outlet for the general public. Like, you tell the general public, hey, check out this Nat Geo article. Everybody knows Nat Geo as the tentpole for a scientific institution. So that's still a cultural thing. But at the same time, it's like, when you do these choices just to get a paper featured on Nat Geo, that's a more interesting note. Like, that's more of a marketing dynamic more than it is a scientific dynamic. Do you know? You guys know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
I do.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's and you're right. There is, okay, it's weird to say blame, but yeah, there is a level of responsibility that is also put on the authors of the paper, because one thing that we do when we write a paper like this, and we do want it to get some kind of publicity, is you do a press release. So it's usually done through the university's like marketing department. But more often than not, all the text writing and the interview bits, kind of boilerplate stuff, is all done by the authors. So they'll like write it all up, they'll put it into a template, and ideally they will also share some kind of media. So they're the ones who are most likely the ones who shared Brian's reconstruction. So in that sense, I'm sure there was a bit of an idea of like, okay, well, it helps to have a sexy image to help sell this stuff when you're getting the news out there. And, you know, I do it. My previous lab does it. Like, this is just kind of par for the course of paleontology. Sexy images get people to want to click and read about your story. And in a case like this, it can be a pretty dry reading if you're just reading the paper on its own, because it's really just a redescription of all these different elements, which is got some very long-term benefits and will be useful, like probably for generations, just because of how much detail's in there. But it's not a real page turner, especially if you're trying to sell it to journals that are just like, not journals, to news organizations that are really just like looking for the next big thing. So I'm sure, like in this instance, Nat Geo is the ones that came up with the title of, and that was probably the editor's job. He just came in and like tossed in whatever that title is going to be. So that, I'm sure, is kind of that's the part that always just rubbed me the wrong way, is the whole Jurassic Park bit. But yeah. The stuff about showing the image, that I'm sure came from Marsh and Rowe's original press release, and then they just kind of probably got an interview with Nat Geo from there and expanded it from that. And then just some editor was like, well, it's Jurassic Park, Dilophosaurus, so we're just going to say this title right here, and that's going to get everyone's attention and want to click on it. Which, I mean, here we are talking about it, so it obviously works.
I only have one point to add here, that probably it's worth adding a bit more context to what people consider to be sexy, because I think, in my opinion, in terms of the dinosaur interpretation, and it's clear that me and Nat Geo do not have the same opinions on what's sexy.
Okay, this is less about what turns you on and more about what catches your attention. I believe in the business it's called a hook, right? So
yes.
It's what's going to hook you in.
It's like there are so many really nice reconstructions that are out there that can be made and still be catchy, and at the same time they can actually be more scientifically consistent than trying to go overboard. I understand that maybe by going sort of overkill, they would guarantee that it's going to get attention. Maybe that's what they were trying to do. It's just, my other question would be, obviously to them in particular, be why this particular paper? You know, what is so specifically special about a paper that just adds a bit more context to an already known taxon and just demolishes the family phylogenetics, you know, just stuff like that. This has been done regularly anyway, sort of, I guess. You know, what is so special about this one that we have to jump on it? You know, that's what I would be asking them, I guess. But go figure.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange because, I mean, like it or not, Jurassic Park is, within our lifetime, the most marketable of the dinosaur meat. It's the most relatable, it's the most marketable, and it's currently the most valid, thanks to the Jurassic World reboots that of the dinosaur medium. That's just what it's going to connect the fastest with the general public. Like, if I say Land Before Time, that's a very small, I mean, there's a lot of people that love it, but there's a very small niche of people that can connect to it. Even within the dinosaur nerds, Walking with Dinosaurs, that connects with a large group of dinosaur enthusiasts. But you also have to understand, these articles are written for a much broader audience. Like, the general public is not too aware of Walking with Dinosaurs as a documentary more than they are a property like Jurassic Park. So when it comes to these clickbait articles, like, yeah, it's understandable why they just want to use Jurassic Park consistently, because since 1993, there's been no dinosaur film for the general public that kind of gives you that free marketing exposure than Jurassic Park. But at the same time, the double-edged sword of that is, if you're going to say something's wrong about Jurassic Park, and then you use a poster child that gets everything just as speculative as Jurassic Park, it's like, then you just outed yourself as far as the invalidity of the claim you just put out there.
Yeah, you trade one speculation for another.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm gonna tap this butt cheek, now I'm gonna tap the other one, and it's kind of two butt cheeks of the same, thing, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah. It's all ass, man.
It's all ass, exactly. Yeah, it's all ass is an ass.
There you go.
And the other thing I would be asking them is, you know how that side of the argument, and people who tend to be always anti-Jurassic Park, why do they keep bringing up Jurassic Park and giving it more traction and relevancy in these kind of clickbaity articles? Obviously knowing, as we broke down, why, but if their purpose is to detach Jurassic Park as a concept from paleontology, and keep them separate, then why are they always trying to shuffle them together? Unironically, or what? I don't know. Maybe they're not aware of this, but by constantly saying this is not what it's meant to look like, Jurassic Park got this wrong, people are gonna just keep seeing Jurassic Park. That's what it reads, and everything else just kind of gets lost. You know what I mean? And that's how Jurassic Park just keeps being relevant in regards to the subject, but they are trying to completely make it irrelevant by saying that it's wrong, and thus still making it more relevant because it's being talked about a lot more anyway. Do you know what I mean?
It's you're looking at different silos though. right? There's the marketing, there's the journalism aspect, which is what are the hooks? Jurassic Park's a hook. Jurassic Park is right, Jurassic Park is wrong, Jurassic Park is green, Jurassic Park is blue. It doesn't matter. You say Jurassic Park, you're going to bring people in. It's the same reason why T-Rex has become a unit of measurement, right? If you can find a way to throw T-Rex in your article about anomalocarids from like the Cambrian, then congratulations, you're going to have people clicking on your article. So that's that. And then there's the contingent of a little zealous anti-Jurassic Park group out there that really just wants people to forget it, but they're not the ones writing the articles. They're just the ones making angry comments in the articles.
And making a lot of Twitter posts, about...
And making a lot of Twitter posts, yes.
Which I'm not
yelling into the void.
So happy that I've left Twitter, to be honest.
But yeah, you're not much.
There's not really much to catch anymore there. It's kind of a train that should be left at the scrapyard at this point. It's been ridden far too many times now. But yeah, well, okay, cool. Is there anything else, guys? Would you like to break down and add on to what we got, or are we happy to wrap it up?
I'd like to end this with some actually more accurate representations of Dilophosaurus, because that's the main thing I want people to take away from this video is what is an accurate Dilophosaurus versus what is being perpetuated as an accurate Dilophosaurus.
Yep, I've got some stuff that you have already sent on Facebook, so do you want me to bring them up?
Yeah, so, I mean, one of the first images is actually a museum reconstruction. So that's from the Arizona Museum of Natural History, I believe. So that's this guy. So that's actually a pretty accurate representation of Dilophosaurus. And nothing about this new paper, as far as I can tell, has changed that reconstruction. Jason, go ahead and give me your feedback on that.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, maybe they make the crest a little bit bigger, maybe. But yeah, it seems fine. I mean, from what I can see.
Yeah, so I mean that's a great example of the process. And then there's another paleo artist that I think is very under the radar. She definitely needs more exposure, but her name is Andrea Lianza, and I'm going to post a picture of her working on her Dilophosaurus reconstruction. But the actual finished reconstruction, I think, is probably the most accurate, beautiful reconstruction of Dilophosaurus I've seen to date. And that's this reconstruction right here. And as you can see, we can see larger crests. We can see more of the saber teeth that go into the actual dentiary. There's definitely room for improvement, but I mean, when we look at the alternative, like, Jason, give me your feedback. Like, what do you think about this reconstruction?
And no, it looks really nice. It's definitely pushing more of the I'm about to bite you look versus the kind of like, I don't know. I guess Brian's reconstruction is I'm going to take care of my kids look. But yeah, right. I mean, two different interpretations, or not even interpretations, just two different behaviors being put on display. But no, the reconstruction work looks really pretty. Like, it's impressive work. I might fill out some of the spaces in that infratemporal fenestra, but that's minor stuff.
I'd probably do something like that as well, yeah. And maybe make a neck a little bit, more robust, not as skinny, because this is probably more of the older trend, when things were just being done more skinny. And right now, I'm trying to do it more balanced,
That's a complete sculpture, though, right? Like 3D sculpture? That's impressive.
Yeah. No, she does great work. And then sure enough, to validate Jurassic Park, funny enough, so her work actually won what was known as the Stan Winston Dinosaur art contest. So it's actually featured on the Stan Winston School. Stan Winston, for those of you who don't know, this is the special effects artist that worked on Jurassic Park.
Yeah, well, I mean, a slight correction was because he's passed away, rest in peace, but now it's, as far as I know, the studio and the school is now being run by his son, Matthew Winston, right?
Yeah, Matt Winston runs the school.
Nice.
So, and then sure enough, because everybody loves video games so much to dictate their paleo art, so funny enough, the best video game representation of Dilophosaurus I've seen, and again, there's room for improvement, But again, it's better than what we've seen for what's being touted as accurate. Is actually the Isle. I found this great screenshot of the game from Sunstar. I don't know if that's the user's real name. But yeah, that's probably like one of the more pretty renders of a video game Dilophosaurus. It even has those big meaty forearms, which is something that I noticed really fast.
Nice.
Yeah, so give me your feedback on that, Jason.
Yeah, it's those are meaty forearms. Yeah, no, that's nice. I mean, look, no one's going to complain about bunny hands there.
Yeah, no, that's actually fun that you like the supinated wrists. There is actually very well executed, because the thing I see about theropods' supinated wrists is they actually get broken in the other direction. So that it's nice not to see broken wrists in any direction on theropod.
Always a plus.
And
Yeah.
the other thing I noticed that I think is something that I personally think many people don't pay enough attention to is the slight increase of thickness down the throat area to allow for, this food swallowing process, to push it down and let it go all the way down to the neck and the stomach, etc. I think that's something that is frequently left out. So,
oh, you mean like how people forget that there's like a windpipe and an esophagus there, and it's not just vertebrae?
Yeah. Well, they do.
Just muscle.
Muscles, yeah. Muscles matter.
Yeah, you ever see a monitor lizard swallowing? It's amazing the size that neck will grow to when they're swallowing stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean they swallow like what, eggs the same circumference of their head.
Or
it's quite a sight. Yeah, necks can get remarkably fat when they need to be.
Yeah,
well, remarkably wide,
yeah,
not fat.
I'd say for people moving forward with their Dilophosaurus reconstructions, use these examples, guys, because this is actually reflective of the science. We've already kind of debunked the feather notions with what Jeffrey brought up with the trace fossils of Eubrontes. With basically, we either have an animal sitting in a grass patch, or does something known as scalation scraping, which leaves these like really strange trace marks on mud. Or we have a Dilophosaurid animal in terms of Eubrontes laying on a bed, and that same formation shows track marks on the padding of the foot, but at the same time, even though there's no integument preservation, there's also not the level of integument that was being presented for a Dilophosaurus with like all this shaggy fur, which we see in the other trace fossil that's associated with Dilophosaurus.
Indeed.
So there's no context, not even phylogenetically, that...
Yeah, Josh?
Go ahead, Arson.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to quickly point out that with the Isle specifically, there is something, to those who don't know more about the game, if you are new to it, you can actually customize some of the colors as well. So, of course, as far as I remember, at the moment, I don't think that you can choose different patterns. So the pattern is going to be exactly the same as you see on a screen, at least last I checked, and that's been months ago as well, so don't take my word on it if I'm wrong. But you can actually change colors of some of these pieces of the patterns, and you can find a suitable color custom, which I think is a good exercise to play around with, if you want to use that template, just to mess around a little bit with your interpretation. And then you can use that, if you want, as a reference to paint an actual model, if you have a model kit of Dilophosaurus, if you found one, that is. And you can use that as well to paint your real life model as well, or if you're doing like a sculpture from scratch, a maquette or something like that, you can do that as well. That's a good sort of way to approach the creative process of doing something like this, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, but hearkening back to what constitutes a life reconstruction of Dilophosaurus, again, these new examples are probably the clearest examples that we have for what should be the guiding light for a reconstruction of Dilophosaurus, because this reflects all the evidence that we have currently. And Jason, I mean, correct me if we have any other evidence going against any of the traditional reconstructions we have here. I mean, the only one I'd note is probably on the Isle reconstruction, those advanced scale structures. We don't have any on that. I mean, that's the only outlandish thing that I can really see.
Oh yeah, types of scales on there, hard to say. I'd say scales are likely, but yeah, the exact like scalation pattern and color and all that's all speculative. And I'd probably grow dentary tooth a little larger, so that would go into that submarial gap, but still good. And then whether or not did it have a green iris? Did it have a vertical pupil? But that's all. Who knows?
That's the crazy territory now. And,
it's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I did a video on the eyes as well, so on the channel it's like a couple videos back if you scroll down, but yeah, it's quite hard to really conclude what they would be like, because you just have such limited information about what the animals were really like in life, because well, they are dead, unfortunately. Or not. So, but yeah, and the other thing as well, Jason, in your opinion, the sort of back spines that are slightly outgrowing, I presume they are not meant to be osteoderms. I think they are just representing also outgrowths of scalation in some shape or form. What do you reckon? Is that a stretch to apply it to the dinosaur reconstructions like that, or is that something that is perfectly reasonable? But again, in your personal opinion.
I mean, yeah, it's fine. It's another one that can go here. It can go neither here nor there. It's like maybe they had that, maybe they didn't. They would still be scales, so it's a variant of a scale. So yeah, I mean, not saying, but yeah, that's another one where you can't really say. I mean, once you start slapping skin on stuff, it all just becomes a degree of speculation.
So yeah, no, I mean, I feel like this is. I'll throw in one more art piece just because I like to shamelessly plug myself. And this just circles back to the Jurassic Park conversation.
Do it.
So I mean, I did a art piece for this fan novel, Shameless Jurassic Park, and one of the tasks I did was to try to do a more accurate representation of the Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus, and I'm going to share that real fast. And there's a lot of things with this that need to be fixed, mainly the skull, because I had to it actually has more lip structure, so you're not seeing a lot of the elongated skull, because the Dilophosaurus in Jurassic Park actually did have lips. But at the same time, we elongated the dentiary, we elongated the neck is thicker. It does have those throat pouches, but that's actually just an adaptation for venom glands. So I don't know, maybe Brian's Dilophosaurus is venomous if we're using the same logic. But it's interesting to note that like a dinosaur reconstruction based off Jurassic Park is actually less Jurassic Park than the current Dilophosaur reconstruction that is going against Jurassic Park. So it gets very meta very fast,
Indeed. All right, so the spikes on the side there, that's for the frill.
That as well, yeah.
Yeah, so that was
based on that. Well, I guess it depends. Like, is it based on the movie Dilophosaurus or the book, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I got to reread the book because I don't know how big the hood structure is, but I justified it in the book. Was it's based off of bearded dragons. So if you look at bearded dragons, they have that flap of skin with those skin structures that look like little spines. So I kind of use that to fashion a more of a caped hood around the neck, kind of like you see with like a black mamba.
Okay.
So the justification is these frilled Dilophosaurs were juveniles, and as they grew up larger, those skin structures just kind of get reabsorbed back into the animal, which we've seen some very extreme examples of that, like just with Hoatzin chicks. The chicks have hands, and as they grow up, the hands get reabsorbed into the wings. So like that is something nature does. It's really strange. Nature's crazy, man.
Do you know your hood concept reminds me of? Do you remember this game called Primal Rage back in the days? There was a character called Vertigo that was actually like a hybrid of a Dino Cobra, but this one obviously is not exactly that, but you can kind of sort of trace it a little bit in terms of the convergent, design choices. So
no, it was a fun concept, but what? Say that again.
Yeah, it's just like some parallels in the design choices, which I found very interesting and couldn't help but not noticing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, when I had to try to find a way to explain away the frill, it got very fast and loose with the rules. But this was the best way I can say, like, okay, there's remnants of a hood, but the hood's gone. So this is
So
closer.
you're saying that when Dilophosaurus grew up, it left the hood?
Definitely, it got a college education. It
I like
But
how
you never
you
really
have
leave the
paused
hoods,
the
right?
mic, to respond.
The hood's always in you.
You can leave the hood, but the hood never leaves you, man. You know.
There you go.
So, but I mean, if anything, just to kind of circle back, like, yes, there are better representations or reconstructions of Dilophosaurus out there, guys. Please use your due diligence when doing the research. The monograph is a great monograph to kind of get more of a correct skull, but as we see, the proportions to the old skull that was reconstructed hasn't really changed. So the skull shape hasn't really changed. Those are the main points I want to get out. Like, if those are my last words, it's like, those are those words. Go forth, my children, and, do better with your reconstructions. I don't know.
All right. Jason, do you have anything else to say as well, or you're good?
I would just say regarding the paper itself, yeah, it's not a page turner, but it was not meant to be. But if you are looking to reconstruct Dilophosaurus, I think it is a good reference piece and first step, because you will get beautiful images of pretty much every single bone in the animal that you can use as a guide for reconstruction. And I'll give a props also to Marsh and Rowe, because their introduction is actually a very nice description of the timeline of the discovery of Dilophosaurus and all the craziness that it went through to get to where we are today. So that's pretty interesting to read.
All right. Well, sounds good. Maybe one day, who knows, we might get more stuff out there about these animals, especially these crested ones. See if they might eventually form up their own family of some sort. Who knows what happens, right?
Yeah, theropods are just, it seems to be a thing. They like to grow weird stuff on their heads to get attention.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. I mean, no evidence to say you're wrong, right?
Actually, you could cite a different paper from Terry Gates and company, where they did look at cranial ornamentation in theropods and how it does seem to pop up multiple times until you get to around the feather clades, and then it starts to disappear. The thinking being that once feathers evolved, or at least display enough feathers evolved, that kind of took over any kind of display role that those crests were doing. And of course, now we have some birds that kind of do a mix of both, but whatever.
Yeah.
There's no rule that says you can't do it twice.
Yep. No rules at all. Okay, well, I want to thank you both for coming to my channel and giving your 2 cents, in terms of this Dilophosaurus conversation that's been going around for a while now. We may be a little bit late on the whole discussion, but I say it's never really too late to have a talk about Dilophosaurus, in my opinion. So
you want it done fast, or you want it done right? Those are your options.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's a good point. Yeah, do you want it to be done right, or do you want it to be done quick? So think about that, those who are watching as well. It's a good question to ask yourself at any point of whenever you make a decision. So, anyways, guys, thanks very much for coming to the show. If you are new to the channel, make sure you hit the like and subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, and at this point, I'm gonna wrap it all up with a nice little bow on top. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Give your thoughts as well about what you think about Dilophosaurus, and do you like this animal? Is it your favorite dinosaur? And would you be interested in making a reconstruction? If you are, share them on my Discord server and I'd be happy to have a look. Jason's there as well, so he will be happy to have a look as well, I'm sure. And at this point, see you guys later, and goodbye until the next segment of Paleo Talk. Rex
See ya,
out.
folks.
Later, guys.